Yes, thanks. Good morning, Paul. Here, clearly, there's a lot of impatience. People are very anxious. They'd like to see the vaccine in the country immediately. But the problem is this, that what's really happened is that the very high income countries, they bought vaccine even while the vaccines were undergoing trials. So in other words, at that stage, it was purchasing vaccine at risk. We didn't really know then, while they were undergoing trials, whether the vaccines would be effective and whether they would be safe. But they hedged their bets. They bought different vaccines at risk, and of course now we do know that there are these two vaccines which are pretty safe and very effective, and they are being rolled out in these countries. These countries have bought up. They reflect about 13% of the world's population, and they bought up 51% of the production of vaccines. So the middle-income countries and the low-income countries, of course, were left in a way kind of wanting. So what's happened is that COVAX was established as a facility for pooled procurement mechanism for equitable access to the vaccines. So we've signed up to COVAX, and that's the delivery that will come, as the President mentioned, in the second quarter of next year. But what I must also mention, and the President also did mention it, is that there are other bilateral negotiations taking place with manufacturers. And that's together with the business sector of the country to secure the funding. And that's to get vaccine in addition to the COVAX allocation, which is probably going to be about 10% of the population, but to get additional vaccine for the rest of the population, and also as early as possible. And clearly the first part of the first tranche of vaccines, the first amount of vaccines, will need to go to the highest priority groups.
The highest priority groups, exactly who will qualify as soon as we get the vaccine in South Africa?
Well, we're really looking at those individuals, those people who are at highest risk of getting infected, and that's, of course, the healthcare workers, and also those who are at risk if they do get infected. So that's the elderly, particularly those who reside in care homes and in residential homes and in institutions. Also key personnel, and there's a lot of work to define who would be the key personnel to be first in line. And then also people who are living in sort of institutional settings and in prisons. The problem there is, of course, that if there is an outbreak, it spreads very rapidly. So we need to kind of immunize those people. So that's the first tranche of what we call priority immunization or selective immunization of the high risks. Then after that, once we've done that, then we can go on to immunizing the majority of the population, what we call universal immunization, to try and reach herd immunity. And this is the kind of process which is being followed in countries overseas as well. So, for example, the United States, United Kingdom, Europe, they are at the moment only immunizing their high-risk population. To roll out to the rest of the population, of course, also going to take time. It's going to be over the course of next year.
And as you speak about the processes that needed to take place to acquire the vaccine and about how other countries purchase the vaccine at risk, what are the requirements then of an effective vaccine? What would it need to do for us to really be confident that it is indeed effective?
Well, I think ultimately it gets licensed by our local regulatory authority. It's called SAHPRA, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. That's the ultimate step. They need to kind of look at all the data from the trials, and also a dossier, a very, very detailed dossier, which goes into how the vaccine is made, what the constituents of. These are massive tomes which come to SAHPRA for evaluation. But obviously, if these vaccines have already been licensed overseas by Federal Drug Administration of the United States, MHRA from the United Kingdom, and the EU from the EMA from Europe, they will obviously shortcut that process. But every country has to regulate and license its own vaccines, and our country won't be exception. But of course, these vaccines have been evaluated right from the clinical trial stage. And there's an independent safety monitoring board which looks at the vaccines, both for efficacy as well critically for safety. So it has been evaluated from the trial stage to the preliminary licensing stage by national authorities, and then the local authorities, the local regulatory authorities, in our case, SAPRA, will also go through it very, very rigorously. Because you must remember, vaccines have to be absolutely safe. They're given to healthy people. It's not like medicines which are given to sick people. These are given to healthy people. So we have to be absolutely sure that the vaccines are safe.
You say that it's given to healthy people. Does this mean that you still need to be vaccinated if you've got COVID-19, or would you then have to wait a certain period before you allowed the vaccination?
Well, our problem is that, and this is still research in progress, is what are the parameters of immunity once you have been infected? And this we don't know as yet. There is some indication that there is immunity, which does last maybe for a few months. There are also some indications that the antibodies which are produced do decay quite shortly after infection. So at this stage, we have to regard people that have been infected as if they weren't infected. So there's no harm if somebody has been infected and they do get the vaccine. That's not a problem. So at this stage, in terms of the vaccine rollout, in terms of the strategy, everybody would need to be eligible for vaccination, irrespective if they have been infected in the past or not.
And when it comes to, I mean, the new information that we're getting around COVID-19 is that the second wave is driven by a new variant. And does this now speak to the sort of immune response a COVID-19 vaccine should now provide? And what would that entail?
Yes, thanks, Mpho. I would say that really what's driving the second wave more than the variant is human behavior. I think human behavior kicked off the second wave. It was that super spreading event. The variant is more infective. It is about 70% more contagious. So that is also contributing to the second wave. But I think really human behavior is really ultimately what's driving the second wave. But just in terms of answering your question about the immunity after vaccination, yes, I think we at this stage we don't really know how durable that immunity is going to be. Also, with regard to the variant, so far all indications are that the vaccine will be as effective against the variant as against the original virus. That's the findings locally and also findings internationally, where they've also found the same variant. The vaccine will work as effectively.
And very lastly, before we let you go, what are your biggest concerns as we go into a lockdown level 3? I mean, we heard just a garnering response to the president's speech that a lot of political parties are saying that lockdown level 3 wasn't necessary. We should have instead just had the vaccine and all would be well.
Yeah, I think there's a misunderstanding about the place of the vaccine. The vaccine, certainly in the early stages, is really only a supplement to what's the main thing is really human behavior. Even in countries which have started vaccination, you look at the United Kingdom where they've started immunization of the high-risk groups. They're having a very, very marked, very severe outbreak of their second wave. So it's going to take quite a long time before herd immunity kicks in. That's even in the wealthy countries which have started vaccination. So for quite a while still, we will depend on human behavior, and we will depend on the mechanism. Can we rely on human behavior alone, or do we have to have state-instituted regulation of human behavior? Unfortunately, human behavior, what it is, and also that we've been going for what 10 months, 9 months, 10 months into. There's a lot of fatigue. And people, we can't totally rely on people's behavior, so we do have to supplement it with certain restrictions. And the vaccine's not going to just switch off the epidemic. It's going to take time until we reach that place of herd, that level of herd immunity, that threshold of herd immunity. That's not going to happen immediately.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. That insight coming from Chairperson of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Vaccines and Professor of Virology at Wits University, Professor Barry Schoub.